Hello, I'm Penelope Maver, and welcome to Earth Converse podcast, where we explore our relationship and conversations with the Earth, all in the hope of inspiring a deeper connection with ourselves, each other, and the Earth that is our home. And today I'm really excited. This is my first virtual friend, my first Twitter friend that I made. And so this is the first time we've actually virtually seen each other. We've ended up, Lorraine, I followed her, Lorraine Smith. So I followed her through the Volan's work, and then I noticed that she liked trees a lot, and she's a bit of a poet and a writer, and I started following her, and then she followed back. So we were sort of in that sync. And actually, it was when last year, and I had this idea for the Earth Converse anthology, and it was Lorraine. It was out of anybody. It was you that I said, posed the idea. What do you think of this idea? And she goes, oh, that sounds great. You know, what? Conversations and relationships with the Earth. Do you think people will talk about that? Yeah. And then she said, well, how do I support you? And I went, well, yeah, I'd love you to come on. And so we ended up exchanging, and it's just been so lovely. And so Lorraine, I mean, she'll tell you, I mean, her vision is to really, is regenerative. I think she started back in corporate responsibility back in 2004. There's a story before then, but in terms of really stepping into the big conversations with corporates and public limited companies, and really helping them look at themselves around their transparency and well, she'll tell you. I don't need to really explain that, but what I like, so Lorraine, so why for me is just so special. And today is sort of like a case study of Lorraine. So she's just done this ultra sort of marathon run just with her mates. She turns up on a Sunday to have a podcast. I bet she's made what she's wearing, I'm pretty sure, because she's a weaver and a spinner. I've got a New Zealand connection too, which I like. So there's just sort of this integrated weaving. And so what we're going to talk about, or we're just going to go settle in for a chat, because there's this real individual connection, deep connection with trees. She's got a book coming out about relationship with trees. And so deep connection right from when born in Toronto. And then this really strategic, she's at that really leading conversations around regeneration. So, hi.
Hey, wow. I thank you so much, Penny, for having me on the show and for your very kind introduction. I actually want to loop back to the Twitter pen pal thing, because I feel like I share the excitement of, I feel like I'm meeting a pen pal. And I don't know if you did this when you were little, but when I was a kid, I had written correspondence pen pals, like through a teacher who had a cousin in the UK, or, you know, some random reason to have a pen pal that I'd never met. And in some cases, well, I think in all cases of the actual pen pals, I never did meet them. But in this case, we get to meet and actually like play in the same sandbox and hang out. And I think I sometimes argue in my mind about the negative side of social media, you know, the screens. And in a recent podcast you did with some of the youngsters that you had on, where you got them talking about screen time and whatnot, thinking, oh, it's clearly a challenge. Yet the upside is we can all connect. And so it's what you make of it. And the way I use Twitter as much as I can, I don't doom scroll. I don't go into the wormholes of darkness. I do seek out people doing amazing things and try to listen more to them. And that's how I found you. And so I just think, like, that's beautiful. Also, for the kind introduction, I might just, if I can, put my bio into a nutshell and then throw a little query back your way and see where it goes. Because I feel like, you know, here we are, late November 2020. It's been almost 20 years of being focused on corporate responsibility as a, I guess, profession, as the way I turn my lights on and, you know, pay for this internet connection that let me find you on Twitter. And in the last 4 or so years, since becoming independent, so I'm an independent consultant, freelance, based in Montreal. When I first went freelance this time around, I was still living in New York City, doing a lot of work with John Elkington at Volans, as you signaled. when I went back on my own in 2016, I really wanted to lean into the regenerative nature of the work. So shifting beyond sustainability, beyond the kind of corporate initiatives and, the relentless incrementalism that many of us lament, and seek out those edges where new business models are proving that by doing business, you don't just do well, you heal. You enable life to thrive. You function in what we could call a biomimetic way, and really seeking those out and listening to them and learning from them, and then following, like finding them and then finding out who are they working with and who are they working with. It's very fractal in a way when you find these pods of activity. But I needed to not have to fill out timesheets to be able to do that. And so I went out on my own. And I've been pursuing a bit, and I'll happy to share a bit more of that. But I guess what I've realized is I've still had to keep paying the bills by doing the corporate work. And so I'm still sort of in the belly of the beast, doing a lot of environmental, social, and governance, or ESG reporting work, and strategy and goal setting with a lot of big companies. And I'm proud of the work I do in a lot of ways. I work with amazing people. Some of the teams and clients are just, these are world-class, talented, brilliant humans, and they're all trying to lean in and do the right thing. But I do feel like I'm on a little bit of a cusp in terms of how I can contribute to make the kind of difference that I think needs to happen at the pace and scale that I think it needs to happen, without really knowing what that even is. And so that feels like another edge journey to understand, well, where is that happening and how can I help grow? So I do feel like it's an interesting time in terms of what I'm up to. And I think it's why, Penny, when you reached out and said you were thinking about exploring the conversations we have with the earth, it felt so resonant, because it feels like, yeah, that's what we all need to be doing. Like, of course, it's actually common sense. So when you reached out, I was actually at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. I remember responding to your WhatsApp message and leaving you a voice memo in response. And I can picture what sort of looking around. It's a beautiful time of year. Yeah, so it makes perfect sense. So I wonder, if that's part of what you have been picking up on, is this recognition, this awareness, sort of tapping into it and letting it flow. It feels like that's how we found each other. So yeah, I guess I'm sort of floating that as a question to you. Do you sense that, or what led you to even pull all this together?
I think, well, it goes back to our own individual journey, doesn't it? We find it there. And recently, there was called the Marva Institute. They went for they put out a pitch for some funds, and on Friday it said, no, we didn't accept yours. And all it is about how to reconnect with the earth. And it's like, I want to know why they declined that. It's like, this is the most important thing that we need to do. Connect with ourselves, each other, and the earth that is our home. There's nothing more important. So I'm a little bit blinkered. It's so big, but it's also, so it feels so obvious.
Yeah.
And so therefore, and it also feels, I was trying to think of the parallel with mindfulness, we've said, like, I think I did I'm starting to do a PhD, 10 years ago on it, and then it's just sort of exploded, very mainstream. And so there's timing, there's cultural change, isn't it? And I don't think that I'm there's people, I'm in the footsteps of humanity, really. But I like of mainstream yet. I might be, or just for you, like, I sometimes describe myself as I'm too hippie for the corporate world and too corporate for the hippie world. But I think there's also, I've heard you talk about being a bridge. It's not only just because of your wonderful linguistic skills and you've worked in like the finance, haven't you? And you've been a lumberjack, like it's sort of a mix there. But this sort of like, these bridge people or translator people. And so I want to mainstream, talking to the earth.
Yeah, it's interesting. we have this challenge, and I think probably everybody listening to your podcast and, you know, a lot of the people we'll connect with are probably already in this camp where it seems really obvious to us that, you know, we already have the instructions for how to live well. It's called nature, and we just need to read the instructions a little more carefully, and then we'll do all right. But then, of course, you know, I'm being a bit glib because, well, clearly it's not that obvious, because it's not how our markets are designed. It's not how our economic models and most of our business models are designed. It's not even how most of our families are designed. You know, it's not how most decisions are made. So for me to say that it's obvious is maybe unfair. And I think of examples where, you know, I'll go with the bridge theme for a moment. And I say everything I say these days, I'm sort of questioning, like, how much of the problem is me? Like, where, you know, where's my own kind of, where are my shadows and where are they leading me astray? But let's assume for the moment that what I'm about to say is part of the solution, not part of the problem. It's a big assumption, but we'll assume that for the moment. I remember when I first got into corporate responsibility or corporate social responsibility, which I didn't even know was a field when I got into it. I like wandered into a field that I didn't know existed. Like, oh, where am I? This is interesting. And there's a whole kind of backstory about how I wandered into the field, but I did. And I got there having worked for 3 years in a financial institution, and then I left. I went, I just quit. I was just like this, even though I had the most amazing bosses, and I've actually just recently reconnected with one of them, and we just had such a warm reconnection. He's put me in touch with interesting folks here in Montreal. So, you know, it was a good interpersonal experience, and yet it didn't make sense to me. And so I left, and I was there for 3 years, and I didn't have a job to go to. I just knew I shouldn't keep going to that one. I'm not independently wealthy, so it wasn't like I had the, you know, I could just have leisurely lunches for years on end. But I had enough socked away that I could buy a bus pass and go travel across the country for a while and check in with farmers. And I've always found that if I joked, you know, if I ever want to know an answer to a question, I just ask a farmer, because they know stuff, and they have to know stuff for their livelihoods, and just they're much more connected to life's cycles and like basic biological reality and the seasons, etc. And as a spinner and a weaver and a knitter, which I have been, well, I'm mostly a knitter, and then I became a knitter when I was a little kid in the 70s, and then in university, I bumped into spinning. So that was the early 90s. So it's been decades of spinning and many decades of knitting. And then I learned to weave along the way. So I'm more of a spinner. And I'm going to put a pin in that. We're going to come back to why is spinning actually fundamental and weaving is secondary. But anyways, I learned a lot from farmers. I just decided to leave the financial institution and go travel and talk with farmers who were raising sheep and cattle and all kinds of things. And when I came back, I was only traveling for a couple months. I, along with making the world's weirdest blanket, I spent a little.
One of them, yeah, where the lady said, "Why don't you do the bus?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's in that presentation that I shared with you. Yeah.
In there, because that's Lorraine's got this great little story. I'll put the link in so you can access that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and in that presentation, I only share a couple visuals, because when you take the whole thing in, it just looks like crazy town. But then I needed a job. Excuse me. And I really stumbled into the field of corporate responsibility. And I remember well, and my friend and colleague Catherine Bohr would absolutely back me up on this if she were here. She was the woman who hired me to begin working at Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, which was the not-for-profit that hired me back then in 2003. And you know, she said, we need help with communications and member development, and it's basically a network. So we need help doing all the things that a network does, and you've got communication skills, and you seem crazy enough to say yes to this job. You don't even know what it is. You can't remember the acronym, but you have a pulse, and we have a tiny budget, so come on over. And she took me out for lunch that first day to welcome me to the tiny little team that was just growing. And I remember saying, so this is interesting. How many years do you think we'll be working on this? Like, when are we done? And she laughed. She was like, oh, it's going to take a little while. And I remember thinking, well, why? You know, it's so obvious what we need to do here. And so I did that work for a number of years. What made me go here was the bridge comment. I began just doing like helping with marketing and helping with events, you know, stuff that you actually didn't really need to have a clue about the content. You just needed to know how to like manage an email list and follow up with people. But more and more, I got kind of embedded in what was going on. I was like, this is kind of interesting. For instance, one of the, we did consulting and we did member networking stuff. One of the consulting projects was with a large company, is now publicly listed, a Vancouver-based apparel firm known for its yoga wear, that at the time was still private and kind of had a lot of cachet. And they were doing an assessment of their sustainability and their practices. And they had hired Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, CBSR, the organization I was with, to help them with this. And so it was kind of an all hands on deck project, and I was sort of rolling up my sleeves and getting in there. And I remember meeting with the team from the company, and they said, yeah, well, we're pretty far along on our fabrics, but where we need to look at is our supply chain, and because they were starting to outsource. Tell me more about your fabrics. Said, well, no, it's all good. We got these eco products. We're working with bamboo. I said, oh, tell me about why. And this is 2004 or 5 by this point. Tell me about why your bamboo is an eco fabric. Oh, because bamboo is renewable. Oh, okay. So cotton's renewable. Is cotton an eco fabric? No, cotton's very bad. Oh, why is cotton bad? Because it takes a lot of water. Okay, does bamboo take water? No, it takes way less water. Oh, what about in the viscose process, where it goes from being a plant to being a fabric, and it goes through a number? Is there water involved in that? The viscose process? It's one of those like, you don't just take bamboo and like wave a wand at it and then it becomes fabric. It becomes fabric by being reduced to a slurry, extruded into a filament, spun, knit, or woven, and turned into fabric, dyed, finished, processed in many, many ways. So the fact that the plant is renewable may be relevant, but so is cotton. Cotton isn't the problem. It's what the humans are doing in the cultivation of the cotton. And so here I am, the like random part-time at that point, new hire who like couldn't remember the acronym of the business, but I'm talking to this growing apparel company who's positioned themselves very clearly in the market as an eco player. And the people responsible actually didn't know the first thing about how their fabric was made. Of course, there are people within the business who knew, but they were not the ones creating the strategy or the marketing material. So I find myself playing that role a fair bit, where it's like, do you understand how things come to exist? And not that I know everything about how things come to exist, but it turns out, I guess I know more than a lot of people, because a lot of people don't have a clue. And for whatever reason, from an early age, even before being officially in the field and kind of been given a mandate to go figure stuff out and bring it back to base camp, I actually remember quite vividly being in university in the early 90s. And in particular, so I went to Mount Allison in New Brunswick in Canada, and we're still pretty regulated in the beverage alcohol world. Not in Quebec, actually, where I am now, but in New Brunswick and in Ontario, where I grew up, you could only buy alcohol in what we would call the liquor store, or in New Brunswick, Liquor Commission. It's the only place you can go. The store sells liquor. So you go to Liquor Commission, on your Thursday, Friday night before you start partying, and then you get your booze and you go off and you do the fun things you do in school. At least that's what I did. But I remember being in the store and looking at the shelves. And of course, I'm looking for whatever I'm looking for and buying it. But I'm also seeing at the front is a bottle, and behind it is all the other bottles with the same label. And then right beside it is another bottle right behind it. And having this awareness that each of those rows reaches back into many places that I can't see, where the glass came from, where the label came from, who designed the label, the stuff inside of it, the cap, the pack, everything just had this like kaleidoscopic universe behind it. And then in front of it, so someone's going to buy it and it's going to go somewhere, and it's going to go to a party, it's going to go to a wedding, it's going to go into an abusive household, it's going to go to a frat hazing, it's going to like, what's going to happen when that's consumed? And that's just booze. And that would happen to me all the time. So I've sort of spent, I guess, my life like listening to these signals, like where did this come from, how did it get here, and where is it going, and what's going to happen next? And that bridgy feeling feels like second nature to me for some reason, but I don't think it is second nature. It turns out it's
that's like a power. And I'm just thinking, it's kind of fun, because the finance was actually for retirement funds, wasn't it? Like it was so much future, and then you, in order to heal, or the first reaction, you're leaving that to go down to the roots and to talk to farmers, which like
yeah.
and yeah, so yeah, the superpower of seeing that, of sort of either visualizing it and seeing the sort of the logic of that in past and present, and kind of could be overwhelming. Like, you know, like that sort of responsibility of that, but also you've got the good questions, you know, you help people think, because they're so sort of, yeah, do the strategy, but actually just take that pause and to think and ask those tough questions.
I guess, although the truth is back then, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? I was just sort of wondering, like, I wonder how these bottles were made. I'm like, I think glass is made of sand. You know, where did they get the sand? Like, just kind of musing in a blur of ignorance. And since then, so since leaving, yeah, I'll fill in that hole a bit about retirement savings because it's kind of fun, or sad actually, but it was a good catalyst for me. In those 3 years that I was working at Manulife Financial, based in Toronto, which is where I'm from and where I grew up, and so it was a Toronto-based job, but actually working for the U.S. pensions division, which so Manulife was headquartered in Toronto, but had a big U.S. division. So I was in the U.S. pensions division, kind of haphazardly. Whole other story how I ended up there. And it struck me as very peculiar that our job was to come up with marketing strategies and the mathematical algorithms and the, you know, ensuring the fiduciary responsibility, all geared to maximize people saving for retirement, without ever really offering any information other than, like, upon request, the legally required information about what the money was doing for all those decades that it might be invested. So there was tons of marketing stuff saying, if you're young, you know, time is on your side, helping people understand their risk tolerance and, like, you know, practical things about financial savings. But I was like, well, you know, and this is, I literally probably never heard the term corporate responsibility or ESG investing or sustainability. Like, I don't think those were part of my vocabulary at all. Just seemed to me to make sense. Like, if you're going to tell someone they're going to tuck money aside for a few decades and it's going to grow and grow and grow, and they're going to be all this, like, rich when they retire. Like, first of all, why do we retire? That's a weird dichotomy, but that's another story. And then it's like, they're going to have all this money, but what has the money been doing? Because they weren't stuffing it under the mattress. If they stuffed it under their mattress, they could see what it's doing. Nothing, just under their mattress waiting for them. But it's not. We're handing it to you. You're this massive business with towers everywhere and broker dealers and you know, fund lineups and asset managers and all kinds of stuff. Like, well, surely it's paying for something more than just the machine, right? You know, like, help us out here. And that was considered heresy. So leaving that world and going into what was the CSR world, more frequently called the sustainability world as time went on. And now, although I'll humor those terms, I don't embrace them. And even regeneration, I'm a little cautious around it. I almost, like, don't want to use words. I feel like, you know, trees and migratory birds and bats, they don't need to label things. They just function. And that's a ridiculous thing to say. And here we are speaking English, and English is great. So I'll use English and say, getting to regeneration now, I've had the honor, frankly, and privilege and very humbling experiences in many cases of going backstage in a lot of industries. So I've either worked on projects and been a paid consultant or advisor or facilitator, or I've been an engaged stakeholder, like giving perspective on, or sometimes I've just been a, like, slightly random and not always invited guest where I find myself, reminds me of that, what's that Woody Allen movie, Zelig, where he's this character who just keeps showing up in the strangest places. I sometimes feel like Zelig. And that's meant that I've gone deep into, sometimes actually into the factories or raw material suppliers of apparel companies, of food and other fast-moving consumer goods companies, of mining and metals companies, certainly banks, and food and fragrance and flavor. And I mention that because going deep into the fragrance and flavor industry is where I've had the flashbacks to being in the liquor commission and seeing those bottles. At one point, we were in one of the production facilities of one of the largest flavor and fragrance companies in the world. This facility happened to be in New Jersey in the US. And we were walking through, I'm on a team that's doing a whole bunch of deep dive stuff to look at their strategy and goals and whatnot. And we're in this production facility and we walk past this stacked high bunch of crates. And I have this flashback to late high school, because we're walking past, this is a true confession, sorry mom, that we're walking past the peach schnapps flavor bins, or like barrels, that will be shipped to McGillicuddy's or whatever, and it was this wretched booze, totally targeted to teen binge drinkers. I mean, like, what an awful product. But walking past the smell of it, and then I remembered my feelings in the liquor commission, where it was like, where do all these things come from and where are they going? And it's like, well, this is where they come from. They come from the Willy Wonkas of the world, who've been designing molecules, sometimes from natural plants and other biological systems, sometimes totally synthetically, petrochemical based, like a lot of the fragrance substances are made from polymers, from long chain molecules from the petrochemical industry. So, and that, yet your nose or your tongue say strawberry or dark chocolate or chicken, you know, and sometimes it really is from, meanwhile, in that same facility, you know, workers are doing their thing and there's all these areas taped off and forklifts everywhere, and a worker goes by, you know, with his hairnet and his big bin of frozen chickens. And it was like, oh, that's for the chicken flavoring that's going on down in, you know, building number 4. So I've been filling in those gaps, like learning a lot of time in the forestry industry. And I was an industrial tree planter. I was an industrial tree planter, summers 91 and 92, I think. And then the object of the game was put a tree in the ground every 6 feet. And I didn't know. I mean, I guess I knew, but wasn't asking more. What did that mean? Like, put a tree in the ground. Okay, these are going to be rows. We're in clear cuts. We're in industrial clear cuts. I knew that I was in a clear cut. I knew the land had been devastated and that didn't feel good. I knew that it felt off. But we were so young. This is going to sound really disrespectful, and I actually don't mean it disrespectfully, so take the analogy with a big grain of salt and awareness of my ignorance. But it was a little bit like what I've understood the military can be like, where you conscript lots of young folks who don't really know much and who are given an assignment, and the assignment is so challenging that you just kind of lean in and then you start to compete within the assignment. And so we were like, I mean, we were messy and we worked hard. We worked 14, sometimes 16-hour days, because the light up in Northern Ontario during the summer would stay long. And we're in brutally hot clear cuts and we're living rough. I mean, we were not good to our bodies. And we just did it. We didn't ask questions. There were times when our site was a swamp and we're up to our knees in like muck for 14 hours and still plugging those trees, or, you know, planting something that's swamp happy, black spruce or something like that. And just so overwhelmed by the physical ardor that questioning, like, does this make sense to replant one species for hectare upon hectare in the blaring sun? Covered in pesticides, by the way. These things are covered in pesticides. So yeah, that sort of fed my kaleidoscopic understanding as time went on, and I worked with the forest sector. I was like, oh, that industrial tree planting is what ultimately led to the Forest Stewardship Council and all kinds of, anyways, I could go on. But I started to fill in the kaleidoscopic blanks a little bit, and that's helped me maybe be that bridge and start to see a little bit.
And the insight, yeah, to see it. So there's a couple of things when you were saying, like, I think to go to the source, to see our production process, like to see from the source. I think, did you ever see the Planet of the Humans? I think one of the most powerful things about the documentary.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about it. Yeah.
Really, I liked it. What they did is, like, you know, how, you know, just going literally to the source, to, you know, the raw minerals, you know, the big industrial processes that make our car door, you know.
Yeah.
We need to be more aware of that, you know, because I don't know what really took to do this computer or my cup of tea, you know, to actually, because we're so removed from it. I think there was this incredible, did you see the Nature Risk Rising report out earlier this year for PricewaterhouseCoopers and WEF, the World Economic Forum? They were going to do, like, it's called Nature Risk Rising. They were going to do 3 series. And
I don't know if it's that.
one so far. I actually did a comment on it. Because it was sort of, one of the conclusions was some industries have a high reliance on nature, and I just thought, we're all reliant on nature. I mean, of course,
the rest of us are reliant on some other magical planet that we just don't always access.
or fundamental elements, or spiritual elements or sacred elements. It's just irrelevant. But so I think there are some industries that are obviously closer to that. The forestry is different from the flavor and fragrance. But there's also something about sort of culturally where there, so many people, and I've talked about this before with Linda, talking about there's survival work and there's soul work, isn't there? And most of us are sort of in survival work. We just do the task, whether it's or we don't think, we just get the money, and we're not even, and leaders we're not even encouraged to think, because of the leadership. This is my leadership thing coming in, about being very directive. People don't coach, they just sort of do that, sort of liberate human talent or human potential. They just say, can you get that task? Can you plant those trees? Do it now. And we're all, I think it's also part of, just tell me what to do. We're creative people and full of talent and potential, but we also can easily take the easy route out. But I suppose, like you go and saying you're on the edge, you're in the, I don't know, the valley of the beast. And the sort of out, on the outskirts, sort of, I don't know, you're at an edge cliff, or you're on the, you're on the edges, and that's where things happen, don't they?
The fertile edges. I just read, is it Maddie Harland, one of the early voices in permaculture? And I think Permaculture Magazine, I may not have the name exactly right, but she published a really wonderful book. It's a beautiful book visually, but it's also just a wonderful series of essays from across the decades of publishing around permaculture. And it's called Fertile Edges, which is, of course, a very permaculture-esque notion that that's where the action is. I want to pick up on something you said about our potential, because I feel like this has been a big theme for me. Again, sort of challenging myself, like how much of the problem is me and how can I contribute to solving that? I feel like, so it's not, I think the timing makes a ton of sense why you host this podcast now, like these ideas around having conversations with the earth, about nature, about our relationship with nature. I think, it's very timely. It's emerging in many areas. I'm seeing it in my corporate work. I'm seeing it, I guess I'm awake to it, so it's not surprising it's sort of coming at me, but it feels like it's very of the moment. And I feel like one of the things I hope to help others see is that, just as you say, like every industry is close to nature, like there's no not nature. And I like to push that further when I hear people talking about, so for instance, right now, one of the results of the pandemic in Canada, and I suspect this is happening in other regions as well, is that there's a bit of a flight from the city. So those who can afford it, let's say you live in the city, but you have a country home, right? A lot of people are really prioritizing staying in their country home. Those who don't have that luxury are moving, they're cashing out. Their city home has gotten, the value has gone up, they're cashing out. So they're buying new homes or new land to build a home in what we would call the country. And that's doing a bunch of things. It's driving prices up in areas that were kind of fringy before, where it was like, what the heck? Now it's not fringy at all, and it's getting very, very expensive if you're trying to buy, and it's getting quite lucrative if you happen to have land there. It's like, whoa, wow, geez, I could make a mint. I'll set aside judgment, although you're probably hearing a little bit in my voice around whether or not that's a good idea. And I'll just say that we have the vast majority of humanity living in cities. And that I do believe we'll see in the near term, because of the effects of climate, first and foremost, although the pandemic is an interesting confluence. I think the major impacts of urban migration that we're going to see will be because of the changes in where water is or isn't. even with those changes, from everything I've understood from the smarter people around me who model these things, our human population is set to be predominantly urban for the coming decades. And what I'm keen to not resist, but kind of move around and find another way to understand is that if you want to feel safe and well fed and to enjoy quality of life, if you feel like you have to leave the city to do it, then I'll be a bit of a jerk right now and say, I think you're probably contributing to the problem, because most of us are in cities, and it's the cities that are producing the things that are going to let you live the life of Riley in the country. And most of this now just be judgmental and like mean. Most of the life of Riley leaders that I know are wealthy. So it's a privilege. And so when you run that math, you're like, oh, I don't really want to deal with that dirty, the great unwashed there in those alleys and nooks and crannies. I'm going to go where I can get fresh air. And frankly, I should be honest, like my family has a country home, although now it's actually my sister's full-time residence on Manitoulin Island. And I grew up going to a cottage. We're not uber wealthy by a long shot, but if my siblings and I decided that we wanted to sell the land on the largest freshwater island in the world, on the shore of the largest lake within a lake in the world, it's a beautiful piece of property. If we decided that we were going to like reorient our finances, we could suddenly sell it now because land is rising there. So I'm one of the jerks that I'm critiquing. I would rather change that paradigm and say, what would it look like to be in the city and have those feelings? What would it look like to be I'm in an apartment right now on the 4th floor of a building in what's called Vieux-Montréal, the old part of Montreal, right down by the old port. And, let's be honest, this part of the city, which is, by the way, a very touristic part, not right now because of the pandemic, but during the nicer months when there isn't a pandemic, this area is swamped. I sit out on my balcony and I just watch tourists flood in and out of it. It's like a little Disney kind of situation. But I don't see a Disney situation. I see a situation where when this land was colonized by European imperialists, and the First Nations who were here were largely devastated over the centuries or cornered into very small, less savory parts of land, a genocide that played out over centuries. And in many ways, at least an apartheid regime still continues here. Technically, the genocide, according to the Canadian government, wrapped up in 2015 with the missing and murdered Indigenous women inquiry. And I can add some notes for the show notes for this. Most Canadians don't even know that there was a genocide playing out here in my list. And so the effects of that are active now. So what I see when I look around here is I see the legacy of imperialism, colonialism, genocide on the human front, and a very asymmetrical trade arrangement, let's just say. I also see the legacy of an extremely extractive, linear industrial mindset, which is, oh, look at these towering white oaks and these amazing cedars. Those are perfect for shipbuilding. And it happens we have all this stone we've brought across from England to keep our ships, I forget the truth. There's something about the shipping brought a lot of stone, I think, as ballast, or I'm going to get the technology all wrong. But anyways, brought a lot of stone over from England. So the forest was removed for the shipping industry and all the other things that the, motherland wanted, and replaced with stone. So there's beautiful cobblestones here. And the people were kind of turned upside down. And then this whole city was built such that the natural surroundings, beautiful Mount Royal, Montréal, which was a lovely forested space, all the way that nature used to live in relation to the St. Lawrence River was completely disrupted by all the building and highways and, canalization of the river so that ships could pass and get past the rapids and. So I look at that, and instead of just saying like, oh man, it's a trafficy mess around here, like get me out to the country. And by the way, I do feel nice when I go out to the city, but instead of saying I got to get out of here, I say, well, what kind of decisions can we make now that bring us, we're probably not going to remove all these buildings. we're probably not going to have towering white oaks here, certainly not in my lifetime. But what would it look like to imagine that we could? What would it look like to say the city is where you want to be, not because it's where the action is, not because you can get a job, not because it's creative or there's concerts, but those things too, maybe, but because the air is beautiful, because you feel well, because you can eat delicious food that came from right around the corner, right? So I look at that and I say, that's the direction of travel that I think we need to be going in. If you still just don't like being in a city, fine. But if you want to contribute to what comes next, especially if you have children, maybe instead of escaping because you've got the financial resources, what about like leaning in and being part of imagining, creating those spaces? So that really sort of occupies a lot of my mind these days. And it definitely comes across as heresy. I do feel like a little bit of a crazy person, but it's kind of how I'm feeling my life.
Friends, or when you talk about this, because this is I think this is a really interesting. It's one of Earth's, big challenges.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's so challenging.
And here's the people running away and building up. Do they feel offended by that, or what is it? What is the hair Sam? Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm actually, these are really judgmental things I'm saying. And if I think of my friends and family and peers, if they were here joining this conversation, maybe they'd have a very different way of responding to what I'm saying. So maybe I'll just speak for myself and say, I don't yet see that it's normal to imagine cities in this way. In fact, where I see progress in quotes, where I see resource flowing is to doing more harm, not less. So I think I mentioned to you in some of our correspondence, I went on, so I'm obviously off the top, you mentioned I did some running. I'm a long distance runner among other habits I have. And part of me just likes to run. I think some people experience a kind of inner rhythm or inner calm in quiet seated meditation. And I do meditate as well. I do have a daily meditation practice. There's something about the rhythm of moving for me that I hear people describing their meditation practice, and I say, I find that when I call it making eye contact with the world. So when I run, I'm making eye contact with the world. I'm moving at a human pace. And I'm also experiencing the geology wherever I am, right? If it's hilly, I'm experiencing hilly. If it's a riverbank, I'm that flat, So I've learned this habit of running has been really good to me because it's allowed me to run to places that you don't see from the road or the train tracks or however you're getting around. And I've started to notice things that are lifting up for me and kind of signaling. And I was scheduled to run my first ultramarathon on October 10th this year. And it was a trail run in Bromont, one of the local mountains not far from here. And a lot of races were being canceled this year. A lot of people switching to virtual races or kind of just changing it up. But Bromont, right through the summer, they were able to stay the course. A pretty small race, and people can distance quite a bit on these runs. So it looked right up until near the date that they were going to be able to pull it off. So I was training all summer. It would have been my first ultra distance. So ultra marathons, anything over the marathon distance, which is marathon is 42.2 kilometers. I've competed in a few marathons, but they've always been road runs. And I've been really keen to get out more on trails and just go further, just get as far as I can. I want to come back to the human potential thing in a sec, that and spinning and weaving. But I hadn't done a lot of trail running, so I was training for trails. And then 10 days before it was canceled, because we started to get into this wave 2. Montreal was in what they call a red zone. They were really discouraging people from coming and going. And so I ended up creating my own virtual race in the end. And I decided to pursue a line of inquiry that had been on my mind since moving to Montreal from New York just about 2 years ago, where I started to really check in with the river. I live right down at the old port, so I can see the Lachine Canal within 10 seconds if I go out my door, literally within 10 seconds. I go 30 seconds, I can get to the shore of the St. Lawrence River. And the river has kind of just been very present for me, and I've been thinking about it a fair bit. And so I decided to switch the race. It was going to be tricky for me to do an unsupported trail race, and just the logistics and everything. It's going to be tough. It was an 80K race that I was registered for. So I decided to create a route that is about the equivalent, and ended up being closer to 90K, exploring the banks of the St. Lawrence, mostly on the south shore, especially where we created the St. Lawrence Seaway, where we cut, I say we, humans in the 1950s, cut into the south shore of the St. Lawrence to make way for large ships to be able to get all the way to Lake Ontario and to some of the bigger ports there, right? Toronto, Detroit, go up. And these ships can now go all the way to the northern part of Lake Superior. So all the way into the Great Lakes system of the North American continent. And I just wanted to understand that more. Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? What is that for the river? And of course, I don't speak river, I don't really know what it means for the river, but I went on that run, and what I saw was, it was sort of awesome, as in I was full of awe many times over, partly just for the resilience of the river. I mean, this is an amazing river. It is huge. One of the bridges I crossed, it's 2.5 kilometers long, the bridge, and it's a footbridge that really touches the shore very close. So it's not kilometers of like ramp. It's just crossing the river. It's 2 kilometers. Just beautiful. And what it's able to do, like, it's just always renewing itself. It's just the most amazing place. Even though we still dump raw sewage. We still dump raw sewage from Montreal into the river, and many other things. Yet the river is able to do a lot of the rivery things it's been doing since time immemorial. But the other thing that really caused me awe was this sense of our human so-called progress is not all, but a lot of what was evident to me is designed to, like, get over and around the river, like get the river kind of out of our way, sort of overcome the river. And so things like these enormous bridges, these massive infrastructure projects that in many ways are incredible feats of engineering. Reminds me a little bit of antibiotics. It's like, antibiotics are amazing because they save lives, and thank goodness we invented them, but they're also causing us a lot of harm. So when they're used indiscriminately, they're not good. And I feel like our engineering is the same. And looking at how we've been living in relation to this river, I just started to sense, I was reminded of my sense of our not respecting this incredible body of water that allows us to live, and is the reason we're here. We're here because it made a lot of sense for humans to be where the river was. There was already settlement here. It was a sort of a logical place from a multi-resource perspective. So when I think about progress, I worry is not the right word. I observe that the mainstream, why is it heresy to talk about the city the way I talk about it? It's because that's still not understood as a good idea. A good idea is a bigger, better bridge where traffic can flow more fluidly. A good idea is where, high-skilled construction jobs are developed. And I think, okay, like, I get that. I'm not going to say those are necessarily bad ideas, but I think a good idea is where nobody in their right mind would want to leave the city because it's wonderful, because their needs are more than met, because they can thrive. So that's the heresy pieces. It's just a bit weird to be like, the closest I hear, and this just makes my heart shrivel up like a little raisin, the closest I hear to why people want to be in the city is because real estate values are still going up. Right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's sort of like, I'm thinking, where you're going in the corporate world, the organizational industrial world, you're finding those really good case studies. The people doing pretty amazing things and are changing and systemically in
Yep.
I suppose systemically is by nature the biggest system, but doing their best, where their pockets, and that's where the change happens. That's where the fringe happens. So you are that, and I can imagine, and there'll be people in the city who do want to stay. That they love that connectivity and the vibrancy, and they are committed to an urban urban environment, and you'll find those people as you do, that will and from that they resonate out, don't they? Because I do think that is literally across the world of that urbanization. And we've sort of exchanged, so that idea that everything is nature is our sort of root, that wherever we are we can connect with that. And of course, if you're, and once again, it's a spectrum. The person who's in a city slum is not having the same experience as somebody out in there, who've bought a finca out in the in the countryside. So I mean, it is. But then, like, how do we, whether where it is education, or it is finding those pockets of, urban. I know I'm an urban planner by trade. I did the
I didn't know that.
regional council and their growth strategy, and how to integrate, economic, environmental, social, in terms of, and growth. I'm really fascinated by how do we do that? How do we do that well? How do we get a bunch of people in that can co-create? And I love, Japan, you go to, not that Japan's the ultimate, but, all that neon and engineering, and then you find these oases, and they can still have this beauty and respect. And I don't know, there's some sort of balance, that we're just out of balance. And I don't know, I'm just taking, like, the river. I loved your exploration of the river. I'm going to put a link into that, because there was a lovely, where you are observing that urban environment and, the impact, and where there's progress and evolution, and where there's, real damage. And then I just, like, I don't know, if we weave back to potential, like, I sense the sort of like engineering sort of masculine thing with this flowing river, the feminine, and that dance, I think we're imbalanced in ourselves towards that masculine way of being in the Western world. And so we're out of our femininity, and that's reflected in how our spaces.
I'm going to come back to this human potential thing, because I see this as relevant within companies, and then within, like, the urban planning, and it's sort of everywhere. And so I'll just kind of talk about it as a broader theme for a sec, and then land it in the city. And I'll borrow running, because it's a really handy, it's not even an analogy, it's a reality, which is, so I'm a pretty average runner. I'm just going to come out and say it. Like, I wasn't a runner. Like, I didn't do track and field when I was a kid. I was not known as a runner. Like, it wasn't like, oh yeah, she's always been a runner. Oh, she ran lots of races. No. I did run my first marathon when I was in my 20s in 1997. So, and then, back then we didn't have all the apps or anything, we didn't have cell phones, and I used a piece of string on the subway map to, like, measure my distances, and, like, I had a plan and I trained, but I was not particularly quick. It was a bit of an anomaly. I didn't have other friends running. It was actually my boss, this amazing woman that I was sort of mentored by when I worked at World Wildlife Fund before working at Manulife Financial. So, I ran a bit in my 20s, but I wasn't training all that hard. I didn't run it very well. I think my first marathon I ran in like 4 hours and 17 minutes or something. It was by no means like an elite time. And I dabbled a bit over the years, coming and going from it. Sometimes I find my spinning and knitting, my reading, and my running all compete a little bit for time, because those are mutually exclusive tasks for the most part. And so it would ebb and flow, and my life went in various directions. And then when I was living in New York for more or less the previous 10 years now, I got back into running. It was actually Hurricane Sandy that got me back into running. So Hurricane Sandy hit New York in the fall of 2012. And I, up until then, once in a while would go for a run, maybe 5 or 10K, not consistently, not with any race goal. And then when Sandy hit, and it flooded the subway tunnels. So at that time I lived in Manhattan, and I had a day job. That was my last, like, proper day job. I worked at Sustainability, which is a boutique sustainability consulting firm that John Elkington founded, and he was no longer there when I worked there. But so I worked there. I lived in Manhattan, but the office was in Brooklyn. So every morning I would take the subway, but then Sandy hit and the subways were flooded. So there was no subway. And I thought, well, it's not that far actually. It's about 5 miles, which is about an 8-kilometer run. But, well, I can definitely do that on foot. That's not a big deal. I hadn't done it before. It hadn't crossed my mind to do it before, but I was like, well, I'm going to do that. So I got a knapsack, which is still my knapsack today. Every time I put it on, it's a hurricane knapsack. And I jogged in, and then I jogged home at the end of the day. And it was just sort of what I did. It was like my commute, basically, because all of my colleagues lived in Brooklyn, and so they could all get there. It was a really interesting scene in New York after Sandy. It was a little Mad Max. My neighborhood did not lose power, but I was just 2 blocks. We called it NoPo and SoPo. So NoPo was no power, and SoPo was some power. I lived in SoPo, so I was, I think, 49th Street was the cutoff, and everything south of 49th didn't have power, but I was just north, so we had power. And then I would run through the part of the city that didn't have power, and it's just like, it was bizarre. And running home was pitch black. Of course, all the lights, the street lights were out, and the traffic lights were out. Although, of course, there was no gas, so there was hardly any traffic on the road. So for a couple weeks, I ran basically 16 kilometers a day, broken up in 2 to commute to work. And then I realized, like, oh, this is totally doable. It's not because I'm a marathon runner, it's just because it's totally doable. And that got me back into distance running. I decided to register for the New York Marathon the next year, which I ran. And that got me into the New York running community. And I ended up kind of getting part of this really interesting group that met on the Upper East Side at this great running shop, Urban Athletics at about 96th on Madison, if my memory serves. Great shop. And this fellow, Jerry McCary, was just this this sort of savant running coach. And he guided a bunch of us, and I went from kind of just hacking around running a bit to running a 3:25 in Chicago in 2016. So by this point, I'm in my mid-40s, my late 40s. So I've gotten faster. I've taken almost an hour off my marathon time. So part of this just sounds like I'm bragging about my running, but actually what I'm saying is I'm not like, if you saw me, I mean, I guess now if you saw me in my running gear, you'd say I look pretty fit. But honestly, I'm not known as an athlete. I'm not an extraordinarily strong person. All I did was decide to do those things, and then to listen and learn from people who knew a lot about how to unlock a certain kind of potential. And in 20 years, as I aged, I got faster by an hour. And that showed me something really fundamental that's been influencing my work, which is, because that's just running. But I think that that's true on a kind of fractal level for everything. That if you start to see things in a way that says, well, what if, or what's possible, or what could happen if I talk to people who know more about how to do this, who understand it differently, who've been there already, and they describe it, and then I believe it exists, and then I go there, then what happens? It's like, it turns out really amazing things happen. And so just to continue in running for a second, I, got better and learned more and got excited about it. And not because I was winning medals. I still don't place. Like, I'm not if I go in a really small race, I might place for my age group, but I'm not even close to the elites. But I really changed my capacities, and I started to imagine longer distances. And part of that came from spending a bit of time in Ethiopia, which is a little bit of a side trail. It's hard to explain, but some conversations with taxi drivers, I was like, I gotta go to Ethiopia. And I did for a month, and then it was so amazing I had to go back. And learning from folks there, where the idea of covering a lot of distance on foot is just part of how people live in the highlands. Of course, the greatest runners in the world also come from there, but that almost feels like a fetishized version. That's the North American or Western brain going, wow, how far do they go? How fast do they go? That's amazing. That's just our elite fascination, without recognizing actually there's people who cover that kind of ground all the time. It's not a story, it's a way. And I started to realize that we all have so much potential in all kinds of ways. Physical, sure. So running an ultramarathon, yep, I ran 90 kilometers about a month ago. And like 3 days later, I went for a run, and I'm not superwoman. Like my toenails don't look very good, but I'm just a regular person who decided to make that possible by eating and like feeding myself and inspiring myself in a way. It's like this morning we were going to run, I don't know, I was going to maybe do like 20K, and we accidentally ran over a marathon. Like it just kind of happened.
I love that, accidentally.
So what is possible? So then I land that in the city land, and I think, okay, what happens when the people who've been up until now doing like policy development for better transit, like what happens when that sort of exponential mindset filters into their drinking fountain and they get to daydream about what's possible there? And I don't know, because that's not my area of expertise, but I just think, oh my gosh, what if we all got to be our full potential? Like imagine the crazy things, you know what I mean?
Yes, no, but absolutely. I just like, I think it's sort of part of why I'm a leadership coach, in terms of like what our potential. I mean, there's so many things that come sort of flooding to mind, like Tim Galway's, performance equals potential minus interference, and our interference is usually just psychological, or, there's research now that where our body doesn't fail us, it's just our mind thinks our limits. There's like, around, I did some work with sports, psychologists that,
Yeah.
I talked to Ray actually about alternative realities, and we have a consensual consensual realities, that we have a fixed view of that, but there's some alternative realities that are around potential, and talking about psychedelics actually in terms of liberating some thought patterns, or your transport planners. The fact, and I'm working with leaders, is like, actually if they did more dream time, what would that bring? I mean, I have seen on leadership programs, this, when we do the 2 hours solo, what people really connect with. But we have this task going back to your, your young people on there making rows and rows of trees, because we can get stuck in that system. But yeah, we have absolutely it all there.
I think the thing that I'm puzzling, or I'm sitting with these days, is because there's no question in my mind that we all have a tremendous amount of potential, much of it untapped, that can go in so many directions, right? It could be athletics, but it could also be art and poetry and dance, and it could be urban planning, and it could be banking. So the puzzle that I'm sitting with is how to allow that type of potential to flow into one another. And what I mean by that is, so it's all good and well, and I've actually seen this happen with leadership coaching and individuals, where they go through these amazing transformations and they're like, yes, I'm so full of potential, that they walk out of the role they're in to go be full of potential somewhere else that's more freeing, because staying within these confining sort of fictions that we've accepted, these realities that we've converged around, doesn't work anymore. They see, and now that they see, they can't unsee, and so away they go. And I'm saying I should probably say because I have left organizations, I have stepped out of structures that haven't worked for me, and I'm trying to imagine, or well, frankly, I'm trying to figure out how can I contribute to that level of potential being understood and desirable and sought out, and allowing it to intersect with others doing the same to build whole new structures. Because the reason they're building a new, faster, wider, better Pont Champlain, the Champlain Bridge here, is because there's more traffic. Well, the reason there's more traffic is people have more cars, and they have more cars because they're going to their jobs. So to just say like, hey guys, you know what? We got to live in relation to this river, which is a really awesome river, and so we're gonna take apart the bridge for a while, so that, because it's all progressy, and we don't want that anymore. Like, okay, but then all the other pieces of the reason the bridge was decided to be a good idea are still present. So what do we do to not have it be a hippie concept that you don't get in your car and drive to work every day. And, you know, thank you, coronavirus, for teaching us that actually you don't have to get in your car and drive to work every day. I'm sorry that you're killing a lot of people in the process, but I'm grateful that you're teaching us to see the world in a different way. And by the way, cars were also killing a lot of people every day. So I keep meaning to do some numbers and find out the known corona deaths and the known auto and traffic related deaths, because there's been very little restriction on cars. In fact, we're still encouraged to like buy them. Anyways, I'll veer into territory I ought not go into. So how to allow the structures to change and allow people to desire to change those structures. That's the question I come away with, because individually I see amazing recognition. I see amazing sort of inner work and realization and leadership. And I'm hungering for this emergent groupthink that is the inverse of a bunch of us tree planters putting a tree in the ground, and rather a bunch of us, like, imagine if we all ran amok and we're like, you know, we're not actually going to plant these trees. We're going to plant some other trees. We're going to seed this. We saw that moose over there, poor thing. We're going to see if her calf is over there. You know, we're going to like do some wildlife restoration here. We didn't do that. Of course we didn't do that. And what would it look like for that to have been of course we did that? How does that work? So yeah. I'm kind of sitting with that.
Community's doing that, isn't there? You know, in terms of the equivalent these days. You know, I think, yes. I think there are, in terms of, there's much more sort of fluid structures or collective work. I think, so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of want to push back the sort of like, given that, what do you suggest? Yeah. I've got some ideas, but you already know, you know.
Oh yeah, I don't know if I do, but you know, maybe this is where I'll take the pin out of the weaving and spinning piece.
Yeah.
And this will be like really probably annoyingly metaphoric and abstracted, but it's where I draw my guidance really. So people often, especially in our field and the work we do, where we talk about, you know, regeneration and ecosystem restoration, or like this really advanced kind of sustainability. People talk about network weaving, and I appreciate the comment if I interpret it sort of bringing things together, creating structure and form where it wouldn't have been. And where that's coming from, for those who've woven, they would recognize that weaving has a warp and a weft, so you've got threads running perpendicular to one another, over, under, so they create this structure that wouldn't otherwise be there. And I totally respect that. However, as a spinner, and a spinner first before a weaver, I feel like we want to take a closer look at spinning. And I did a bit of writing on this on my blog, and it's funny, it's like, what people don't realize is it's actually quite subversive and provocative. It's the least looked at blog post, because I think it's so subversive. Not that my blog is a very quiet corner of the internet, but this is so subversive that people can't see it. And I think what needs to happen is people need to see this. So what is this? There's nothing to weave if you don't have yarn, right? So weaving, we talk about, we bring things together, we create structure. Well, those things have to exist. That yarn has to exist, or those other things that are being woven, the people, the structures, the organizations. And spinning is how those things come to exist. So spinning is literally taking fiber, whether it's that, you know, good bamboo fiber, that good cotton fiber, that good recycled polyester, you know, PET bottles, sheep's wool, goat's wool, rabbit fur, you name it, fiber that has no integrity whatsoever. No integrity at all. I have some here. It's not useful for those just listening, but anybody who can see, this is a little bit of cotton that I grew on my windowsill in New York City, and it's cotton. It's got no integrity whatsoever, just like the fiber in your, I don't know, in a pill bottle or on the end of a Q-tip. No integrity. You cannot do much with this. You could use it for stuffing, I guess. And you could, I don't know, polish something. Yeah. But when you spin it, when you put twist in it, and it is the simplest form of energy, it's just a little bit of twist, and twist is a form of energy, like heat or pressure. You have thread, and thread has integrity. So you go from something with no integrity at all that isn't even noticed. It looks literally like fluff. It is dismissed as fluff.
Ah.
You take it and you create something that can have the strength of steel, silk, and silk is stronger than steel, pound for pound when spun. So you take something that has no integrity and you give it integrity, and then you have the ingredients to create structure, to weave. And so what I mean by that isn't just like, there are spinners too. And by the way, and those who know me well will know I've made this comment probably ad nauseum, but Donella Meadows, systems thinker extraordinaire, whom many of us revere her work and turn to it again and again. She was a spinner. She was a hand spinner. And I don't think that's coincidence. I think spinning teaches integrity because it's required in order to happen in a very tactical way, kind of like I said, migratory birds don't need language and trees don't need language. They're able to do what they need to do. Spinning doesn't need language. It just is. And there's a lot of things like that. Gardening, you could go to a lot of very basic things and say, we could use words to describe it, but they are the teacher. So what do we do about it? I feel like I would like to help recognize and make recognizable those things going from fluff that has no integrity to something with some strength and integrity that's ready to contribute to a structure. Whether that is an educational module or an organization or just an idea. And I feel like it's the spinning, it's the taking the emergent fluff that is all around us all the time, literally, and giving it enough structure to be useful. And so I'm constantly watching for, where do I see that? And I'll give a concrete example that I see that gives me great hope, where I look very nearby to here. There's a number of Mohawk communities that are still, in spite of everything we've wrought, they are not only resilient, but in some cases they're examples of thriving and really amazing things happening. And I see new language apprenticeship happening where the youth so I'm very fortunate to have a couple friends in one of the nearby communities here, and they run a farm, and it's just the most amazing farm. I mean, they wouldn't call it regenerative, but it is. I mean, in 5 years, they've radically restored a piece of land, and what they grow is just amazing, and how they grow lots of stuff integrated. And most of the people who help them out on the farm are Mohawk youth. And a lot of what happens there is in their own language, and a lot of teaching that happens around like skills that are, as I said, if you want to know how to do anything, ask a farmer. These guys know how to do it. They're learning how to do more. And look at that. And that's just this like little bit of fluff, right? It's these like connections of language coming back together. It's connections of skill and awareness, connection to the soil, connection to the past, to the present, to the future. And it goes widely unnoticed. There isn't a website. There isn't a not-for-profit charitable number that you can make a donation to. It's just happening. And in its happening, it is creating the ability for something that has integrity to be connected to more of a structure. So I feel like how we do that, I don't know what it means to the next big construction project in Montreal. I don't know. That's beyond my intellectual ken at the moment. I can dream about that. But in real life today now, I don't have to dream. I can actually see with my own eyes these amazing elements of fluff coming together to make real yarn that can be really woven into something that matters.
And I would say, like you're doing that already. Not only are you doing it with your cotton, growing your cotton, but you've been doing that probably all your life. And I think that, corporate social responsibility would be fluff in many respects. It was out there, wasn't it? It was, it was the junior, wasn't it? And now it's right up. Sustainability is, the CEO's got it now, or it's all there. So
yeah. Although, yes, I think that's true. And so we have an exciting challenge with that, because until it's part of a business model that's regenerative, I think it's the kind of fluff that doesn't yet have the integrity to do what needs doing, but the elements are potentially there. And that's where, I guess the last thing I would say on this is like, when I think about the urban work that needs doing to make cities beautiful, there's amazing stuff. I mean, every city has amazing things, and Montreal is no exception. Some really cool things going on, but they're like initiative level. And the main dialogue is still, you know, what's happening with property values, right? How expensive is housing? So how do we tilt that and make it like where, you know, I don't know, but I imagine a world where who cares about property value? In fact, the word property needs to be blown up.
Oh my goodness. You know, like yeah, I keep on quoting the same thing about like sapiens, you know, the construct,
Yeah.
the property, you know, and
Exactly. Yeah.
and just even going back to like urbanization, you know, where universal basic income or just sort of, you know, enough money to help everyone feel safe, I think, in terms of, you know, I think there's benefit of artificial intelligence. Actually, at some level we've created that because we know our potential's greater. You know, we're going to create space for thinking and poetry and good thoughts and you know, so good visions. I mean, you know, that we can create that thinking time, or you know, I mean, as cities, do we want it all to be capitalism? Or I see it here in our little village, you know, foreigners buy up. And it's like, why haven't we got a system that creates a certain barrier? You know, I think in New Zealand they're not allowed to stop foreigners buying. You know, I think there's some big decisions that we have to make as a society or something around that. I don't know. I feel like I'm going.
It's big. There's so much to this. Yeah, I mean, there's lots to say. I guess maybe. Well, yeah. Over to you. I know I'm going on. So it's.
Yeah. No. I don't. I'm not too sure. Like, I just think it's, you know, having that faith. When you're going back to the individual, I mean, it's sort of like where, you know, you trust yourself. I mean, you literally, like, we do our own work. We do our own healing. You know, what is our own shadows? What is our own integrated self? So I think it's always coming back to ourselves, and then by if we're fully into our, you know, well, no, I'm just sort of thinking we're always doing stuff, you know, as humans. We, you know, like, there's no wrong thing in our lives. We've done no, you know, it's all part of. But the more that we can get stronger in our integration and in integrity, and then we do end up in that collective, you know, helping the collective, and it does grow.
Yeah, I guess maybe the shadows is something to pick up on. Yeah, and I'd love to sound this out a little bit, and I'm also aware it's getting very late there, and I'm having my like post marathon. I might need a nap, so I should.
Yeah.
So I do want to touch on the shadows thing for a second, because I think another area I see wanting a little bit of blowing up. It's all connected, right? Let's blow up property and our notion of owning things, and, you know, this linear industrial model. We know that's done, so we got to blow that up. And let's unleash our potential so we can deliver on the most elegant, beautiful, amazing ways of being, and do that in collaboration with one another. Like, yeah, awesome, okay. And when I see some of the like really exciting initiatives and websites and like dialogue going on out there, I see beautiful, wonderful things. A lot of it I'm like totally into and inspired by. And sometimes I feel like my culture, I guess I'd say, like raised in a Western, like achievement oriented mindset, we really overemphasize the need for it to be awesome and to like celebrate the wins and all that kind of stuff. And I want to make sure we realize a lot of this is actually coming from a really horrible place. Like my ancestors didn't do anything wrong. I'll go with that. There is no right or wrong. And actually in the process killed a lot of people and did a lot of harm to ecosystems and each other. And you know, the hows and whys of that are worthy of lots of scholarship and dialogue. But, and the fact that a genocide continued to play out in Canada, and a very, very racist, anti-Indigenous and essentially non-conformist culture still continues here. And, the percentage of people in our prisons, the fact that we have prisons and in it, these are systemic dark areas that don't go away when we have these like rosy pictures of like children in fields of integrated crops with some goats. That's not gonna get us there. So and don't get me wrong, I love goats. If anyone who's hung out with me knows I have a bit of a thing for goats. In fact, this is made from my hair, and I know the goat herd who raised the goats.
Dramatic effect. It's true though. I mean,
yeah. So we need to be, it doesn't mean, spend all day thinking about genocide. It does mean recognizing how much of what I have materially, how much of my ability to have gotten the education I got, to have been to the places I've been, to have created the network of people that I have, how much of that is because of the harm that was done to others. And not to say it in a shaming way, not like, oh my God, I should give everything away and, live on the street. No, but recognize that this is true, or find out what is true. And then in recognizing that, make darn sure I'm not part of repeating it. Because what worries me is I see this kind of back to the land movement. I'm like, eek, it's another round of colonization, basically. It's another round of like, I'm just going to go buy land somewhere that's better because I don't like it here for whatever reason. It's too crowded. There's diseases. I don't like the politics. All the reasons that my great grandparents left, except it's just going 250 kilometers away instead of across an ocean. It's not solving the mindset and the structural inequalities and injustices and atrocities, ecological and societal. And so I'm a bit of a Debbie Downer at, back when we had parties, because I would raise that and say, like I love the idea of regenerative farming. And I have regenerative farming friends. I've mentioned the Emergent Strategy, the book by Adrienne Marie Brown, who the book was mentioned to me by a wonderful friend who's a regenerative farmer. And so like, I'm all for regenerative farming, please. But along with celebrating the shiny, happy people and the guys with beards and the kids with rubber boots, we need to remember why we're here, like how we got where we are. Absolutely. And what we took and what we still haven't given back.
Yeah.
And there's a cost to that. And as long as we don't remember that, we are part of perpetuating its continuation or its repetition. Absolutely. So I guess like when we talk about darkness and the inner work, it's partly, I have my own personal journey, plenty of darkness and baggage to work through, and good days and bad days and all the rest of it, like a lot of humans, certainly a lot of like single women of a certain age, humans. But then when I take a step wider and I say, what's the fractal there? What's the fractal inner journey of understanding that darkness, that baggage, that sorrow, whatever it may be, and then go wider and say, what else and what else and what else? And so that as I go through my own personal healing journey, I can recognize a contribution to and a connection to a wider healing journey.
But that's beautiful awareness, Lorraine. I think, I think we have to do what you're just saying. I think in order to acknowledge our past, knowledge our ancestors and our roots, and whose shoulders are we standing on, or whose land are we standing on. And I think that, and to be that healer, to be that, that I think the human, we might go in cycles, but we want to do a darn sight lot better than than happened in the past. And that stepping into that, and I think this darkness, we have to face that and we have to see what has to die within us, whether it's our beliefs or our values or our habits or our constructs, in order to be reborn. I think, at a organizational level, I think we need to talk about death and, and not even dip in performance. What has to die? What has to I hear, board members in order for you to evolve?
Compost. It's all about compost. My worm composters that I had worm composters when I lived in New Zealand, had them living in Toronto, had them living in New York, have some again in Montreal. My worms have taught me so much about how life actually works. It's like you put that banana peel in there and you get the best soil, but you have to put the banana peel in there. Otherwise you just have squirming worms who die. You have to let that stuff go, and you have to put it in the right place. You just put it in the garbage, it rots, and then you have to deal with rot. But if you put it where that rot can nourish what comes next, and people, it's so funny. I love talking to people about worm composting. People are like, oh, that's gross. I'm like, you think worm composting is gross, but throwing nutrients away and letting them rot is actually like tidy. We've got it all upside down. So yeah.
Really, really.
Yeah.
On that, I actually on death, I always thought I would want to be cremated, but I do want to be buried. I do want worms to get me. I want to make good.
Nice. I think I'd like to get to the bottom of a body of water. I think that's where I belong. If it's like safe and not problematic for the creatures, I think I should just be some rocks in my death apron, and let me be at the bottom.
Nice.
On that cheery note.
I think that's the, we need to, that's where the conversation doesn't, where, you're beautiful Montreal, and, I think there's where, I at any level, I think we need to. There's so much to cover, but I suppose, at some point we'll just wrap up, or what is,
sure.
What is is there a final?
It's funny, I always sort of kick myself after I give a presentation or something, where I think I should have had some kind of call to action, but I don't really. I mean, I'll try now, which is I would just say, I hope we can embrace our potential. I feel like this is a time, I see the next little while, or I see now already, and the next few years being very, very trying on many levels. I think they already are for a lot of people. In different ways, I would include myself in there. It's been a very trying time. I'm very privileged. I'm safe and well. And then there's been some trials and tribulations. I won't detail at the moment. And yet I don't feel fearful. Sometimes I feel a bit angry about how things are playing out, but mostly I just feel really curious and really excited, even though it's kind of catastrophic and accelerating. And maybe that's what ultra training has given me, or maybe that's why I got into ultra running, or, it's also maybe what spinning and playing with art has done for me. Is just like, we don't know how things are going to go, but why not both stick around to find out and imagine what we could contribute to make it excellent, instead of staring at the part of the path we really don't want to see happening. It's that, there's so much of this talk of like manifesting, or, dream the reality and imagine you're in that reality. And I guess it's a version of that, and genuinely not being afraid. And so I guess the call to action I give myself, because I definitely have some dark times. Fear. I'm just picturing the jury of my peers that I connect with, especially some really great girlfriends in my life who know the darkness. They know, and we're all in it. So, but when those moments happen, I feel very empowered to give myself permission to step out of them and say, like, I was sort of joking again, sorry mom if you listen to this, but like when we were tree planting back in the day, it was a messy time. There was a lot of substance abuse. I was probably one of the cleaner planters, but there were a few times where we messed around a bit, including doing acid. And, acid really messes with your head, right? And so crazy things happen. But one of the things I learned from doing acid is like, it's just the acid. And so when things start to really wobble and feel really terrifying, I can just say to myself, oh, it's just the terrifying, it's just the fear, or it's just that thing that I don't have to give into. I can just experience it with curiosity. And like with acid, I'm not here to promote the use of illicit substances, and I lead a very clean life. We were just talking, I don't even drink anymore. But you can see it from an external perspective and choose whether you're going to fall into that and go into a state of hysteria or catatonia, even worse. I mean, being paralyzed by the fear, you're not serving yourself and you're not serving others. And so I guess I would just invite myself and anyone who wants to join me to remain curious, ears forward and tail perked up, and looking after ourselves as well as possible so that we're ready to adapt to whatever happens, and comfortable enough being with each other and with ourselves that we can move into new and different spaces.
All right.
Yeah, just that.
Thank you so much, and thank you. Yeah, go out and go. Yes, speaking of looking after yourself, go and rest after that.
I'm going to take a little nap. I will take a little nap before evening. The snow is just starting to come here, so a little evening snow nap and a proper dinner. Thanks so much, Penny. It's great to be here.
I was here, and see you back for the next Earth Converse podcast. In the meantime, go out and enjoy nature, one conversation.